Hey, and welcome to the Thodcast, conversations about animation. I'm your host, Philip Elke, and I want to wish you all a happy new year. This is the first episode of 2019, and I'm joined not by my brother this week, but by Jody Pulaski once again. Hey, Jody.
Hi, I'm so excited. I feel like I'm becoming somewhat of a regular on here. Maybe 2019 is the year I jump in for good.
Well, that'd be awesome. You're always welcome. And I'm so glad to have you along to share your insight on the movie we're discussing today. It's a little bit different from our usual lineup because we generally just talk about animated film and TV on this show. But this film is technically a live action film that we're discussing today, but it does contain animation. It has a rich legacy in animation. So I thought it was worth talking about. That is Mary Poppins Returns, Jody. You just saw Mary Poppins Returns. I saw it on Saturday. Directed by Rob Marshall. I know we were just talking about Pirates of the Caribbean and the director Gore Verbinski and his various other directing projects. Well, the fourth Pirates of the Caribbean movie, On Stranger Tides, that was directed by Rob Marshall. Who did Mary Poppins Returns, and then you're mentioning Chicago. He did Into the Woods. Yeah, Rob Marshall has a rich history in musical film, and also is credited as a choreographer on a lot of his projects. I don't know if you knew that. So he's a
No,
dance
I
expert.
didn't know that he had done Into the Woods as well. I was going to mention Into the Woods because of Emily Blunt. That's where I saw her most recently. Was she plays the baker's wife in Disney's Into the Woods. So I didn't know that he directed both. That's interesting.
Yeah, so Rob Marshall's just done a lot of, he did Chicago, he did the movie Nine, a bunch of musicals. I think he got his start in one of his earliest credits is The Wonderful World of Disney, where he's credited as a choreographer. And of course, there's so much to this film. It does follow up quite a bit from the movie Into the Woods. It's got a lot of the same people involved. Disney's Into the Woods, that came out
2014, I think, because it was a Christmas movie as well. You can double check it, but I think it was that.
I think you're right. 2014. Wow.
Yeah, so not all that long ago. I don't think it was considered like a huge, like monumental success, but I really love all of Sondheim's musicals.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to it right away when it came out just to see what they did with it. And I thought it was whimsical enough. I don't know, it's probably better on stage than on the screen.
Mm-hmm. I'd never seen it on stage. Well, actually, I did. I saw like a community theater production of it, and then saw the movie. It was interesting. It's kind of a different, subversive take on a lot of fairy tales, and it intermingles a lot of different fairy tales into one story. It felt very dark, and then the story is supposed to be kind of dark and grim.
Yeah, I think like the theme is sort of what happens after you get what you wish for, like what happens to these characters once Cinderella finds her prince and once Rapunzel gets out of her tower or whatever. So it kind of is supposed to be like after happily ever after, what happens to these characters. So that's always interesting.
Yeah.
To think
Well, and a lot of these classic fairy tales don't necessarily have a happily ever after in some of their earlier iterations, like the Grimm fairy tales. I mean, there's a lot of dark endings, or at least material, and then a lot of that sort of gets glossed over in our more contemporary versions. The kind of modern definitive take on a lot of these tales is, whatever Disney brings in their tellings. And so with Mary Poppins, we're going to just be talking about this as we would any other movie or show. Maybe pay a little extra attention to some of the animated bits. But yeah, Jody, how familiar are you with Mary Poppins?
It's shocking, but I realized I haven't seen the original. I always felt like I had because I'm really familiar with the songs and I obviously know the character Mary Poppins, but when I thought about it, I realized I've never seen the movie, and the only reason I know the songs is because of like in elementary school, your piano books, you have like Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious and Step in Time and a couple of those classics. And then I know the character just because Mary Poppins is like this iconic nanny that people reference
Hmm.
all the times. But I've
Yeah.
never seen the movie, so I got to go in with really no expectation or any worry about bias or comparison because I don't know how the first one went. I mean, I'm assuming a nanny comes in and turns life around, but I didn't have to compare this one to that, which was kind of nice, I think.
Yeah, I think this movie did a decent enough job of distancing itself from the original, just kind of in terms of style and musical comparison, just so that it could stand on its own. But it also is a direct sequel. It, but I think they were wise to not necessarily bank too much on nostalgia. It's got a very kind of classic feel of the classic, golden age of Hollywood musicals. It's just something different
Yeah,
in
what is when
2018.
the original came out again? What year
Well,
did you
the
say?
the original, yeah, was 1964. It's been 54 years.
I was saying that I think my mom said that she saw this originally in theaters. I went with my mom and my family to it.
Hmm.
And the whole time my mom was smiling ear to ear. So it definitely didn't disappoint her if she saw the first one in theaters and she saw this one in theaters because she absolutely loved this, Mary Poppins Returns.
Yeah.
54 years. Wow, it stood the test of time, hasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. They put a lot of care and craft into this uh, new sequel. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, I love the original Mary Poppins. It is something that holds a lot of nostalgia for me. A lot of great themes and messages, and the music is just brilliant. Composed by the Sherman Brothers, who did a lot of work for Disney. Yeah, a lot of the classic faces of that era in Hollywood, Dick Van Dyke and Julie Andrews. And so now we're just kind of pulling from the same archetypes, only in 2018, now 2019. And Yeah, I mean, they definitely didn't want to put out something that dishonored the original vision. And in doing so, I think they maybe, played it a little bit safe. But I really had a good time. The music was great. The story was good. I don't know, things maybe felt a little more monotone in this film than they did in the original. I think the original was just, sharper and more colorful, and um, more variety, like more thematic depth as well in the original. But how can you top that? So I think they did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what I would have been driven to go see this movie because of the cast that they picked alone. So even if the original hadn't existed, I think I would have wanted to see it. They really did pick some all stars to lead it. Lin-Manuel Miranda, I mean, that name right now is like, I would say like one of the hottest names out there in the entertainment industry.
Hmm. Oh,
So when I
sure.
thought he was going to be in this, obviously I follow him after his Hamilton success, and he worked on Moana as well with Disney. So I would have gone to it for that reason alone. And I think you're right. There were some parts that were kind of like glum, drum, humdum
Hmm.
in this, but I think they probably just did that so that the whimsical and enthusiastic parts could stand out a little more,
Yeah.
maybe. Again, I don't have the original to base my opinion off of, but I thought when the movie first started and you see Lin-Manuel Miranda, I wanted him to like burst out in this huge opening number, but it's kind of more of this little like melody he sings about following the light or the London skies. And
Hmm.
but then once they get into the Mary Poppins part, I was like, okay, now they've captured me into this magical world.
Hmm. Yeah, underneath the lovely London sky. Yeah,
Yeah, and he
he's
ends
got a
it with
great.
that too, right?
Mhm.
It starts and ends with that little ditty.
Yeah, and a lot of very notable like musical motifs that recur throughout the film. And that's cool. Like you get to pick up on some of the melodies, and then they reuse a lot of those musical phrases throughout the various songs throughout the film. Yeah, underneath the lovely London sky, it shares a lot of the same musical structure as um, you know. I don't know. It seems like most of the songs have that sort of that phrase at the beginning. The how does it go? Um, let's see if I can recall it. The do 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 do, something like
Oh,
that.
shoot. Yep,
Hmm.
that's exactly. Do, 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 do,
It's
do, do. Du, 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 du. Yep, I know what you're. Yep, I know what you're humming.
hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't remember if that's from a specific song or is that nodding to the original. Is there a song in there? Because it's like in
I,
the most delightful way. Is it that one?
it's supposed to evoke that the same feel as Spoonful of Sugar, but it is entirely original. Mark Shaman composed the music, um, and he also was joined by Scott Whitman on some of the compositions. I'm not sure if Lin Manuel Miranda had much input. I don't, he's not credited as a musical composer or writer. Some of the music, I mean, it's not quite as distinctive as the originals from the Sherman Brothers, and you get a few occurrences of some of the original songs, just briefly. There aren't any reprises of any of those songs from the first
Yeah,
film.
I was waiting and kind of listening to see if they were going to bring back any of those original songs or if they were going to, bring back because I knew they brought back some of the original performers, like you said, Dick Van Dyke. And I was like watching for them to bring back Julie Andrews, but she's not in it at all. And I
No.
thought, do you think they ever approached her about having a cameo or being part of the production in any way, or was she just totally?
Yeah, she was. I think they wanted her involved, but she decided against it.
Maybe she just wanted Emily Blunt to like be her own Mary Poppins and let like Mary Poppins Returns be a distinct, vibe and not feel like she's coming in. I don't know, because she was obviously like that's such a defining character for her. Maybe she just decided it was easier to like close her chapter and let this be Emily's chapter as Mary Poppins. I'm not sure. I haven't read anything about it, but I was hoping to see her just because I thought that'd be fun for the movie.
Hmm. Okay, so Julie Andrews was the original Mary Poppins, and of course, she's got famous roles in The Sound of Music, and I don't know, numerous other films from that era. She's turned up in things lately.
I'm drawing a blank. I feel like she has a million movies that I should know off the top of my head. I'm only thinking of the Princess Diaries when she's the grandma.
Yeah, she was in those, The Princess Diaries, which was also Disney. She turned down the cameo to appear as the balloon lady in the film's final musical number. And she feared it would be too distracting, which yeah, that's a fairly large cameo.
Yeah, she has
But
almost a couple whole verses during that song "We Go Up" or whatever.
yeah, and even who they picked for that role, I found, I mean, it was nice, but it was certainly distracting to the to the degree where like you're like, oh well, that's that person, which is of course Angela Lansbury. She comes in, and yeah, just spoiler alert, of course, for anyone listening. We're I think liable to kind of go into every detail or any detail that happens to cross our minds when discussing this. But yeah, I mean, Angela Lansbury is she's the same age as Dick Van Dyke, which is amazing. 93.
Wow.
Mhm.
And he's still tap dancing on the top of desks.
He was given four options for the dance scene. So that is Dick Van Dyke dancing. And
Wait, even when he's on top of the desk, that's actually him dancing at 93. That's edited.
well,
Edited.
there could be some magic going on, but um, he definitely did dance for the role.
Oh, I love that.
And he insisted on performing the hardest dance routine. He said he refused. It says here he refused any help from his fellow cast members while filming the scene. This is via IMDb trivia.
I love that. He wants his legacy to be his legacy. That's awesome.
He's
I,
probably in great shape. They had to add old age makeup to his appearance in this movie just to make him look, even older than how he appears, because apparently he doesn't look 93.
I'll have to pull up a picture after
Mhm.
this because they did a good job with the makeup. I thought he was 100.
That was yeah, it was a fun cameo. I mean, I was always impressed by his appearance as the old man in the first Mary Poppins, because that does look fairly convincing as an old age makeup job. And then in that movie, he plays the father of the character he plays in this movie, Mr. Dawes. So in this movie, he's Mr. Dawes Jr. First one, he's Mr. Dawes Sr. And Mr. Dawes Sr. in the first movie, of course, uh, uh, passes away, unfortunately, at the end of the movie after laughing himself to death after being told a joke by Mr. Banks. Um, but that all is well, because Mr. Banks is later confronted in the film by Mr. Dawes Jr. saying that, like, you know Mr. Dawes Sr. got all he ever wanted when he was blessed with a happy passing. So because of that character now leaving the bank, it left an opening for Mr. Banks to come in and become a senior partner at the bank. So that basically was the entire happy resolution of the first film, if you haven't seen it. So yeah, the first, I mean, Mary Poppins is based on a collection of like short stories and children's stories from P.L. Travers. I think she wrote them in the early 20th century. Jody, have you seen Saving Mr. Banks?
I haven't. Is
Okay.
that supposed to be the Mr. Banks in this
Well,
story?
yeah, Mr. Banks in the original Mary Poppins is the father of the two main characters now in Mary Poppins Returns, because this movie's set 25 years after the original, even though it came out 54 years after. Um, and the Mr. Banks is kind of the linchpin of the first Mary Poppins movie, at least according to the author who wrote or constructed the character of Mary Poppins, um, more so around the idea of the father, of the sort of estranged father, because she had her own sort of conflicted relationship with her father, P.L. Travers. Her father kind of was, I think he was a bit of a drunkard, and had difficulty holding down work. So their family struggled. A lot of the thematic weight of her writing came from her relationship with her father.
Yeah, what an inspiration for her to
Mhm.
create this nanny that kind of can come along and make everything right. You
Mhm.
know, I was wondering, what the inspiration was because I really like Mary Poppins, but a question I kind of had throughout this movie, and maybe you can answer me this because maybe it's more clear in the original,
Mhm.
but does Mary Poppins like kids? Like
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure how to say it exactly because she's kind of like witty and she kind of like denies her magic a little bit in front of the father. And there's these like little moments where she looks at the camera and you're almost like, Not that she liked kids, but don't you feel like there were some moments where she's almost like sarcastic? Do you know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
she's very sarcastic. And in this movie, actually, she is supposedly a little more faithful to the book version. Emily Blunt did a lot of research into the original P.L. Travers stories and endeavored to sort of bring that persona to life every bit as much as what Julie Andrews did, which was equally amazing, but like not necessarily based on P.L. Travers. At least I don't think Julie Andrews did much research on the character. She just kind of played what she was given.
Herself, yeah.
Hmm.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I would like to read a little bit more about that because I thought the way Emily Blunt sort of played off those special like side glances and those little like interjections,
Hmm.
I thought it was really unique because I always pictured not seeing the original that she was just this whimsical, endearing like nanny, but she's like confident and she's sharp as a whip, and I really liked that part of her. There's this scene when they go to the music hall. This is when they're in the animated. I think they're in the bowl. It's the animated world, and Lin Manuel Miranda is saying, "Oh, come up on stage and sing," and she's like, "Oh, I couldn't." And you know she's loving it and she loves the attention and she just
Hmm.
rocks it. But I liked that part of her. I thought they made her very like modern
Hmm.
confidence character as a nanny. Because a nanny you could think of as very submissive, but she's not like that at all. She's great.
Yeah, Emily Blunt, is a little less saccharine. She's more icy, and she's like that in a lot of her roles. Julie Andrews is, she's similarly firm and has a lot of sarcastic moments, but yeah, this Emily Blunt kind of interpretation really embraces that even more. And I think she is supposed to be a little older. The character Mary Poppins is of course shrouded in mystery. One
Mm-hmm.
of the one of the classic quotes is that Mary Poppins doesn't explain anything. So yeah, various I'm sure theories have arisen as to just who Mary Poppins is. Um, where does she come from? Uh, is funny. There's a one instance in this movie where I think both Mary Poppins' age and her weight are referenced at various points throughout this movie, and she just gives you know icy glares whenever that subject comes up.
Yeah, I know. I know what scenes you're referring to. I can't remember in what part of the movie it is, but in the beginning when she finally comes to the Banks home,
Hmm.
and she says, "Oh, I'm here to take care of the Banks children," and the
Hmm.
kids are like, "You mean us?" And she's like, "Oh, you
I
too."
too.
Yeah, but I love all those little moments she has, and I
Mhm.
think that's when Mr. Banks and his sister are like, "Oh, you look like you haven't aged a bit," and maybe
Yep.
George asks, "How old are you?" And she,
Yeah. Yeah. You should never mention a woman's age. Hmm.
Mhm.
And then, like later, they're riding on Lynn Manuel Miranda's bike, and like they strap. It's kind of creative how they do this. They just strap a ladder across the back, and like they're able to ride on the ladder as it's sort of spread like wings from the bike. And one of the young boys is like, "How much do you weigh, Mary Poppins?" Just that look that she gives him, it's just priceless. And yeah, so this movie is set in the Great Depression. It revolves around the character of Michael Banks from the original movie. He now has three kids. They're all of similar age, but their names are Annabelle, John, and Georgie. I think Annabelle and Georgie are the oldest. I'm not sure if they're twins or what.
Oh,
And
I
then
think Georgie's the young blonde, the little blonde.
Georgie's the young blonde.
Yep.
Okay. I got that mixed up. I was thinking he was John, but it doesn't really matter. There's the three kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I thought it was funny that one of them's named Georgie, and then he gets sucked down into the bathtub. um, Kind of like the kid named Georgie and It, who gets sucked down into a street gutter.
Oh, yeah, I like it. I didn't think about that at all. That is funny.
Yeah, and of course the girl's name's Annabelle, which is another horror character from recent films, from the Conjuring films. But yeah, their mother is recently deceased. Michael Banks, played by Ben Whishaw, he's inherited the family home, and apparently his parents are deceased now as well. George Banks and what was Winifred Banks from the original, played respectively by David Tomlinson and Glynis Johns. David Tomlinson was in a lot of like old school Disney live action films, like Bedknobs and Broomsticks and Herbie the Love Bug. Glynis Johns has been in a ton of movies. She's still alive, actually, um, and she retired from acting in 1999, so she wasn't going to come back for a cameo in this one. But yeah, now so it's just the two kids from the first movie. The girl Jane, she's now in her 30s. She works in like community activism, like lobbying for higher wages.
Mm-hmm.
And then Michael, he's now working at the bank out of necessity, although he's trained as a painter.
Yeah.
So he's fallen on hard times with the death of his wife, having to raise three young kids. His parents are no longer around. Yeah, apparently he had to take out a loan to deal with expenses from the hectic year, and never bothered to make any payments. So he gets issued a notice of repossession from the bank. Fidelity Fiduciary Bank, which is the same bank his father and he, have both worked for now. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting premise where like you'd think he'd get a little more slack from the bank that he's been working
Yeah.
with. Yeah.
And his only hope to kind of save this home is to find this paper copy of his shares in the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And the bank doesn't have, I mean, there's no electronic copy of anything, but you realize the bank has a copy of the shares, but ends up burning it because he wants to obviously repossess the house. But
yeah, we actually have a serious villain in this movie in the form of Colin Firth, who plays Wilkins. I was kind of shocked when that happened in the film. The first movie doesn't have a real villain. Like the closest thing to an antagonist that movie has is the character now played by Dick Van Dyke in this movie, Mr. Dawes. Like and of course Mr. Banks is I guess the primary antagonist in the first movie. And then yeah, he gets subordinated by Mr. Dawes, and then yeah, that all gets resolved fairly nicely at the end. Well, in this movie, the new chairman of the bank is just this nasty fraud.
yeah, he's a wolf.
Yeah, that was cool. He does play the wolf in the animated sequence.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how like they fell into such dire times though, because you'd think Mr. Banks becoming a partner at the bank, would have resulted in him sort of passing a fortune onto his kids, maybe.
Or at
Unless,
least paying attention to his personal finances. He says that his wife, his late wife, was the one who paid attention to all of that, like the logical things. But if you're you'd think you would have your papers a bit more sorted at home.
I mean, it's explainable in that it is the Great Depression, so there were plenty of wealthy bankers who lost a lot of money at that time, and is possibly what propelled Colin Firth's character to become such a sleaze, he's just looking out for himself in this cutthroat time economically. But yeah, then so they're able to, or they're having to navigate this whole situation, and Michael's a painter, so like maybe he like didn't do a whole lot of investing in um, earning money throughout his career. Um, or at least that market would have dried up with the Great Depression. But it was a really nice touch at the beginning of the movie, the oil paintings, that montage at the start.
Mhm.
Yeah, a bunch of various like London scenes done in a painting style. And that's actually a tribute to the production designer of the first film, Peter Ellen Shaw, who's a painter and production designer. He died in 2007, but he did a lot of work for Disney. He's a Disney legend.
And he did that type of painting and scenery that we saw kind of at the beginning, like the oil paintings, I think. Yeah, I
Yeah,
loved that.
yeah, it was great. He did a lot of the matte paintings for Mary Poppins, and yes, that inspired the career that Michael would then take on. Of course, now he's having to transition to banking, like his father, and of course, Jane takes after her mother with her activism. But yeah, then like all these, of course, they're in such hard times that is prime moment for Mary Poppins to come in and hopefully save the day.
Yes, which she does.
Hmm.
And I love how they bring her back down on the kite. Obviously, I knew the song "Let's Go Fly a Kite"
Hmm.
was from the original one. But like she comes down, and I just feel like the whole tone of the movie changes like within that instance. Like I don't know if they relight the set or what, but as soon as she's part of it, and they go into almost immediately that bathtub scene where the children, uh, she needs them to clean up right away after being dirty park, and she does that song "Can You Imagine That."
Hmm.
That's when it really gets like magical to me. So all these hard times that they're dealing with, it's worth it because
Hmm.
it's the catalyst to bring Mary Poppins back, which I think it's worth it because obviously at the end it turns out anyway.
Yeah.
I honestly can't remember why we kept most of this stuff to begin with.
Don't you remember that kite? We used to love flying that with Mother and Father.
Those days are long behind me.
As I live and breathe.
I was flying a kite and it got caught on a nanny.
Mary,
Poppins, you came back.
you seem hardly to have aged at all.
Really? One never discusses a woman's age, Michael. Would have hoped I taught you better.
So they're trying to save the house. And one option would be to find Mr. Banks' shares in the bank that he'd had from being a partner. Um, so they either need to find the paper version of that, or I think the kids are kind of messing around, and they know that their mother had this bowl. Is like a very valuable,
Priceless, she
yeah,
called.
priceless Royal Doulton bowl. And that then is sort of the jumping point into the animated portion of the film. Um, they're fighting over this bowl. Of course, it gets broken or it gets cracked and chipped. So they need to repair it, and that drives a lot of the action of this film, including the number where, and the musical number, the Royal Doulton Music Hall,
Mhm.
is when Mary and Jack, played by Lin-Manuel Miranda, and the kids, they all jump into this bowl. And yeah, it's a fantastic animation sequence done using traditional 2D animation in the style of the first film.
Yeah, and I think that article that you read through a little bit about how they decided to go about animating
Hmm.
um, within the bowl. I just kind of skimmed it briefly before we jumped on here though, but I think that whole process of doing live action with the animation is so much more complicated than I originally thought. They have to film each scene 3 times. Is that what it said? Because they have to do it once with the performers and then once with the people who are basically acting out what the animation is going to do. And then they have to draw out that animation and somehow do it all over again. And I just kind of take that the surface. I'm like, wow, this is so enchanted. Like they're with the cartoons and not really thinking about that whole process that goes into making that 20-minute, part of the movie. It was probably extremely difficult.
They, according to New York Times, Rob Marshall, the director, he insisted on using 2D animation, which ended up being sort of a more time consuming, more expensive, and just altogether more arduous process than simply using computer animation. That's kind of the mainstay of most modern visual effects films. But he was insistent that it maintained kind of that consistency with the original film. And I couldn't be more glad that they went that direction, because it would have just not looked good if there was just a bunch of obvious CGI in this movie. And that's sort of the downfall of a lot of live action sort of effects driven films nowadays is it just everything looks kind of muddy and not as full of character or life. It's just sort of sterile when they use computer animation or rely too much on it. I mean, I love
Go ahead,
what's
sorry.
that?
I was gonna say, if we ever want to do a podcast about like what I believe is horrible animation, we can talk about Mowgli on Netflix.
Oh,
have you seen that yet?
I haven't seen that.
Okay, we'll save that for the next time it's you and me, Philip, because that's when we really dig into how animation goes wrong.
Okay, yeah, we can watch that. Did you see?
In Mary Poppins Returns, they do it just right.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of your standard computer generated animation, but it's blended very nicely with the 2D animation, and it's kind of just a classic technique that that they were then able to modify using modern visual effects, to better integrate the characters within this animated world. It's mainly just the like the characters of you first meet once they enter the world of the bowl. There's a carriage driver who's a dog, who's an Irish dog.
That's
Yeah. And then the talking horse, and then a bunch of other characters. There's like hummingbirds and penguins.
meeting tons of animals. When they finally get to the music hall, they go into that Mary Poppins and Jack's song, A Cover Is Not a Book song. And I think that there's like a whale and turtles, and I think they fit in like pretty much every type of animated animal that they could into that theater. So you get to see almost every animal briefly.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It took over a year to do. I think they had around 70 animators.
Wow.
Some of whom were retired, former Disney animators, coming out of retirement to work on this movie. The sequence was supervised by veteran Disney Pixar writer Jim Capobianco. And then he kind of worked with a small group of artists in the Bay Area in order to prepare the preliminary storyboards. But then, they brought in a whole big crew of animators doing this traditional style where they hand drew the frames on paper that they then scanned into a computer to ink and color. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's a tremendous feat that they did there. And I think honestly, all that hard work was worth it. Though that scene, the bowl portion when they're in that animation, it's all really, amazing. Like you're almost breathless when they're in there. So I mean, hats off to them, because I think that part really pulls off the magic that is this Mary Poppins story.
Yeah. So the Mary Poppins Returns is also written by David McGee and John DeLuca, along with the director Mark Shaman. Does the music. He's done a lot of things. Hairspray, Smash, the musical TV show, and he had his origins in Saturday Night Live. He's done a lot of sort of comedic type work. He was involved in the South Park movie, Bigger, Longer, Uncut.
I have no idea what that one is.
Yeah, it's just a crazy South Park movie that also happens to be a musical. It's very reminiscent musically of Les Miserables. So, and then Hairspray is a classic.
So he wrote all the songs, or like he
composed them. Yeah, he basically wrote the songs or co-wrote with his staff, but he was the lead composer on this movie, Mark Shaman, picking up the mantle from Richard and Robert Sherman from the original Mary Poppins.
I think all the music was really great. The only one that I thought was kind of a dud was, they leave the bowl world and then they go to this cousin. I don't remember what her name is in there, but she's on Meryl Streep.
Yeah, and Cousin Topsy.
Yeah, Topsy Turvy, and she sings a song that I think could have been cut. I think was my least favorite in the whole thing. Do you remember this part? It's not very memorable to me. They're upside down talking about perception, but it's coming off of this really bright animated over the top world, and then it's kind of into this like darker.
That scene was very like Tim Burton-esque.
It wasn't for me. I would.
Well, and it involved Meryl Streep, who plays Cousin Topsy, and she was one of the leads of Into the Woods. So they wanted to bring her in somehow. It probably wasn't the best fit for this movie, just because it ended up having a few too many just like big names that all got kind of it got a little confusing, but it was fun. I mean, Meryl Streep plays like this Polish gypsy type character. Like her accent that she uses for the character is similar to the one she has for the movie Sophie's Choice. Yeah, she plays a victim of the Holocaust in Sophie's Choice. It's a pretty grim, depressing movie, but is one that made Meryl Streep into kind of the household name she is today.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of it. I just feel like it would be kind of heart-wrenching to watch that one. So someday. That's clearly a classic, though, because you hear of Sophie's Choice sometimes, because she's making that choice between which of her children's going to live.
Yeah.
Right? That's the overall plot. So it's the opposite of Mary Poppins Returns, because all the children live in Mary Poppins Returns, luckily.
Yeah. Yeah. So then after that, like
they go into the is it the Little Light Fantastic number? Is that what's next?
Yeah, they like get taken through this maze on the streets to this like dead end where there's a lone lamp post that then lowers into like underground sewers that they slide down into. I don't know, that was fun. It didn't get too like wild and crazy and animated.
Yeah, I really wanted to like it because they bring out all of those, what do they call them, Learys?
The Learys.
They bring out all the Learys, and you can tell they're setting up for this really big, honestly, Broadway, Chicago-style performance.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked it a lot, the spinning fire, but then they bring out these bikes, like they're doing like bike tricks. I don't know if it's to make it more contemporary or what's going on with the bikes, but it really pulled me out of
Yeah,
for some reason. So I wanted to love the Triple Little Light Fantastic, and the song is cool, but I
the
thought it was
yeah.
some strange choices with the bike.
The art department, they dressed 100 BMX bikes to look like they could be, taking place in the Great Depression era. they they just yeah, they're just straight up BMX.
Did you find it weird, or was I like the only one who was thinking it was a little weird?
No, you're right. It was. I mean, it's still the rest of the movie is still very stylized. It's got song and dance, and so it's supposed to be exaggerated, but then you bring in the bikes and it's like a whole new level of extreme sports.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe younger kids though would find that element really fun. I don't know. I'm not a young boy that's going to that, so for me that was just kind of, I don't know. But my mom really liked that song. She said, and you knowing the original, is there the Step in Time song, like Step in Time song?
Yeah, it's very similar to that.
That's what she was saying. So I think that was her favorite song because she felt like it was like a good like nod to the original.
Mhm.
And I miss that context because again I haven't seen the original, but like that's cool. So
yeah, this movie has a lot of the same beats as the original. The Step in Time musical number, which is that rooftop dance sequence involving the chimney sweeps, kind of matched with this one. With the Learys and then their BMX bikes, and even like the end of the movie, the what is that song called?
Nowhere to Go But Up, something along those lines.
Yep, Nowhere to Go But Up is definitely a take on Let's Go Fly a Kite, thematically at least. And like the moment with the cousin Topsy is similar to the moment with Edwin's character in the first movie where he plays Uncle Albert, and then you learn that laughing for him causes him to levitate. So yeah, they're kind of like dancing on the ceiling in the first movie because of laughter, and then and in this movie it's because of cousin Topsy's.
I think it's happiness and positivity is what lifts them up. Like finding the light in the dark is supposed to be the overall theme. Like seeing that it can be dark, but you can like still find optimism. Would you say that's the overall theme when you get to the end of it? Is like positivity will lift you out of the dark, lightness, whatever makes you light.
Yeah, no, you're dead on. And I think if this movie were allowed to sit with me a little longer, like a lot of the same themes would end up merging in my head. They would sort of connect a little bit more to the same degree that the original Mary Poppins does, because I've had so many years and so many viewings of and listening to the music, to where like that whole ethos has been allowed to really seep into our consciousness. And then with this movie, yeah, it's similar, but I think it does deal with sort of a much more grim and glum premise, with the recent deaths and the financial troubles, the Great Depression, or Great Slump as they call it in England. Whereas, yeah, in the first movie, it was triumphant Edwardian 1910, the age of men, as Mr. Banks calls it. This movie is great for me right now because it does deal with like grieving processes, but also just general life struggles.
And finding hope through it, because kind of to bridge from, they go from that Leary scene, the bridge from that to the end is they have to kind of stop time in order to find these shares, and their way of doing that is they turn out the light on Big Ben, and then Mary Poppins says you can turn the light back on. So I think that theme of light in the dark is where they're going with it. And I think that's relatable for everyone. Like
Mhm.
that's a really easy one to to.
That is quite the image, yeah, of the Learys climbing Big Ben Tower.
It's hilarious.
Yeah. And trying to manipulate time, which is silly because like you can't change time, but they're endeavoring to do just that as um, Mr. Wilkins at the bank, sort of notably against his character, is staying at the bank until
The strike of
um, yeah, the stroke of midnight on Friday, in order to allow the banks to fulfill their obligation. I guess he's only being held accountable to that because one of his um, assistants, yeah, one of the employees, is actually like a virtuous person. They're the two guys from the beginning who serve the notice.
Yeah.
One of them is actually decent and friendly. The other one's kind of a Scrooge.
Oh, they say something really good at the end. I'm gonna try to remember it. So okay, so they end up getting. Is it okay if we do like the spoiler? Like
Yeah.
they get the shares there in time, and then
Mhm.
it's kind of, you can tell it's like winding down for Mary Poppins. She's about to go home, so they go into that final number of nowhere to go but up. But there's a line in it, and I'm going to find it. But where the good coworker is holding onto his balloon, and he's holding on to the bad coworker.
Mhm.
The lyric is something along the lines of, and if you have like extra goodness to go around, like share it with someone who doesn't, because like you'll reap what you sow. I'll find the lyric for you, but I thought it was a really good like throw in, because like there are going to be bad people out there, or people who are more, prone to get stuck in the darkness, but like sharing your
Mhm.
positivity will never be wasted, because it can, you can pull someone up with you. And I thought that was really sweet. That whole ending number was just really cheerful, and I thought perfect. And the ending then, it is kind of bittersweet, because after all this happiness, they don't need Mary Poppins anymore. And she
Mhm.
looks at her red balloon, and she must say this in the practically perfect in every way. She must say that in the original. Is that her
Mhm.
line?
Yeah. Yeah.
So she looks at the red balloon and she's like, oh, practically perfect in every way. And then how does she realize it's time to go home? But basically, she looks at that balloon and she knows it's time to go home. Like the door opens up and she goes
Yeah.
home.
There's a gust of wind,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's during this time when it's sort of the climax of the celebration, with Angela Lansbury, the balloon lady. But man, the precise moment when she knows, I'm not entirely sure. Um, there's also a nice moment with um, Lin Manuel. His character has a crush on Jane,
I
who's
love that
yeah.
subplot. That is so sweet.
I was totally rooting for him, and it's sad because I mean in those days, if you weren't married by 30, you were considered a spinster, and so
Don't
Jane.
say that. But I feel like that's still the case in the South where I am right now.
Oh no. Yeah, so Jane's kind of hung up the hat a little bit in terms of her family prospects, which is totally ludicrous. I mean, she's played by Emily Mortimer, if I didn't mention, and then Ben Whishaw is Michael. Ben Whishaw was recently in Paddington 2 as the voice of Paddington, or in the Paddington movies. He's also Q in the recent James Bond movies. But yeah, like the Emily Mortimer and Lin-Manuel Miranda, they make a great couple.
Is there going to be another sequel where those two have a child and Mary Poppins has to come back again? Do you think they'll do another one after this? This was a success, right? Did you ever get to look at what they brought in at the box office? It must
No,
be a success.
yeah, I think I saw it had $130 million budget, and then it's so far made like 180 million, maybe that's domestic. That was just the number I saw. I'm not sure what the worldwide number is.
I would assume that it was full and it's been weeks.
Worldwide gross, it's currently at 185 million, um, with the production budget of 130 million. So I mean, it's got a ways to go, but that's par for the course this time of year, where you have a lot of family movies that are released around the same time, and with just the expectation that over the winter months, people will just continually go out to see them, because there aren't a lot of big releases in January or February typically.
The only other one that I thought, seemed busy at the theater, which I went yesterday to see this, Mary Poppins Returns, is Aquaman, which is kind of a different demographic
Hmm.
for that movie.
Yeah,
Teenager one or young adult?
yeah. I mean, some overlap, but not much. Both very kind of colorful, whimsical looking films. Speaking of Aquaman, the director, of course, Rob Marshall, is slated to direct the live action version of The Little Mermaid.
I was just going to say, and I was going to bring this up because I was saying how much I love the bathtub scene in Mary Poppins Returns.
Mm-hmm.
The whole time I was watching this bathtub scene where they're swimming with dolphins and starfish, I was like, this gets me so excited for the live action Little Mermaid. This underwater musical number, how can it get cooler than that? So Aquaman, does that take place underwater as well? Is that why they picked him? He has a vision for ocean?
Well, Aquaman just resembles what I imagine the Little Mermaid movie is going to look like. That was directed by James Wan, but yeah, with Mary Poppins Returns and the underwater sequence there, I imagine that's going to play a lot into the Little Mermaid. Yeah, you make a great point. I also love your pitch about Jane and Jack, Emily Mortimer and Lin-Manuel Miranda being like the lead couple in the next Mary Poppins movie. And
Well,
having
Philip,
to
you're
build
in
that together.
LA, so just write a script, get in an elevator with one of these guys, and hand it off.
Mm-hmm.
That's where dreams come true. You're ready. That's the next step for you. Nowhere to go but up.
All right, I got to do it. I just got to fill my heart with hope and dreams, and my life will do the rest.
But it was a great movie, and I wouldn't be disappointed if they did one more in 50 years, and I took my grandkids to it if I get married.
Yeah, well, they wanted to do one the year after the original.
Oh, wow. So they've been sitting on this for a long time.
Yeah, they were really eager, but they never got the rights, or I think they had to get the go-ahead from P.L. Travers with any film adaptation, and they were only able to get the one. And P.L. Travers didn't really like the first Mary Poppins. And in fact, like, they violated some of her conditions with the inclusion of music and animated sequences. She was pretty adamantly opposed to that.
That is a fun fact. I would have thought that anyone, that I feel like dumb saying that it's a classic. I haven't seen it, but that movie's pivotal in so many people's lives. You'd think she'd be like tickled pink that they took her book and made that with it.
She was just an interesting character. She was very strong-willed.
She didn't have an easy life either, so maybe, yeah.
No.
Was a little bit more serious about things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think she approved of Julie Andrews' portrayal. She enjoyed that aspect of it, but the rest of the film she just didn't care for. And I don't think she pressed charges against Disney for some of the choices that they made, like the animation. The movie made so much money. She just clearly didn't care about that. But then when she was nearing her death, like, they entered into negotiations over developing a stage version of Mary Poppins, and that became the Broadway West End version of Mary Poppins on stage. And there's also well, that's kind of what enabled the Walt Disney Company to re-enter talks with the P.L. Travers estate over developing a film sequel to the original.
I was just gonna say, I hope that if she could watch the movie from wherever she's at now, she'd be, excited about it. Like you said, Emily Blunt trying to pay more attention to what the character was in those original books and maybe be a little more true to it. Probably not, because there's still like too much dancing for her taste, but I don't know. It brings so much joy to people coming out of the theater at the end of the movie. You see these little girls and boys with their parents, and you see grandparents that come together. I think it's one of those feel-good holiday movies that everyone should go to. Not to try to throw a pitch for it, but I left feeling uplifted. So I don't know. I'm happy she let them use the story, and I hope she knows how much love she shared with it.
I'm sure Travers was just very protective of her ideas and didn't want them exploited for financial gain. What she saw to be this big corporation sort of bursting in and trying to just, make a cynical profit off of what she had done. And I don't get that, basically at all from these Disney Mary Poppins movies, because they are just very, very hopeful, very idealistic. There's hardly a cynical point about them, but yeah, sometimes people are just so set in their ways, and it's kind of like we were talking about earlier, how like our memories are so front loaded in our childhood and our youth, like our younger years. And I think that can lead people to be resistant to change a lot of times. It's like why are so many old people so like so slow to change with the times, and they're still acting like it's the 1950s and 60s? Well, because the memories that they are closest to are the ones when they were growing up and being formed as people. So it's hard to get away from that.
Yeah, that's probably why she held on so tightly to her vision. And I mean, and your parents, your relationship with your parents, if it was, creating this nanny to escape her father, whatever the case might have been. Yeah, that's a really good point, Philip.
Yeah, it was a retroactive attempt on her part to redeem her father in her mind.
Yeah.
And I think Walt Disney, he had a very similar sensibility, because he had a troubled relationship with his father, and then he would go on to create his own, his own little storybook empire. And yeah, it's just, we all kind of have our own styles, and Walt Disney, I think his aligned so much with P.L. Travers that he was just desperate and constantly pining for the rights to be able to make Mary Poppins into a movie. It's an amazing story of like how
I'll have to watch that. Yeah. You said it was called Saving Mr. Banks?
Saving Mr. Banks, yeah. He was just so persistent. And it's like, why? There are other stories out there, but there just must have been something about P.L. Travers and the story of Mary Poppins that, and it makes sense. Like Disney, he's kind of his movies have a lot of like hopeful ideas, but not too saccharine. There's always a little bit of a sarcastic edge to Disney movies. They can be very self-referential, a little subversive, and yeah, that's definitely something he and P.L. Travers had in common. Definitely playing to a younger audience, but not exclusively to that younger audience.
Never exclusively. They have us for life. So those themes, they stick with you forever. So I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
And I think the movie was great.
It's almost a begrudging adherence to that child or the child demographic. They like how Mary Poppins is almost reluctant to have to deal with kids, but she does it out of the goodness of her heart.
Yeah, yes. I think so too. That was my question at the beginning of this whole podcast was, how does Mary Poppins feel towards children? And
Yeah, she's not the biggest fan,
Mhm.
but there's definitely a part of her. It's kind of like any parent. You sort of dread the idea of having kids, but then when you do, they become your life, and your life has definitely changed, but they bring such a new perspective that is often refreshing to people.
Mhm.
This
They
this
live
idea
kind
of
of
service.
in between. They live in that, like, children. I keep going back to the bathtub scene, but like they
Mhm.
live in this world that's like part real and part magic. So like when you're
Mhm.
talking to a kid, like they really could believe there's a dolphin in their bathtub. They really could believe that they're a little mermaid in the bathtub or a pirate.
Mhm.
And I think that's like kids are magical. You know that I work with them all the time, but even if you didn't want to be a nanny, you'd fall in love with the kids. But I think she loves to be a nanny. I think she's just a little more stern and she wants them to grow up to be good adults.
You watched that Kristen Bell video I sent, right?
Yes. I mean, you can't go wrong with Kristen Bell because I love her. So she could have done nothing in a Mary Poppins costume and I'd be raving about it.
Mhm.
But as soon as I watched that, I thought, oh, wouldn't it have been fun? Not as a negative on Emily Blunt, but how fun would it have been if Kristen Bell was Mary Poppins?
I think she is kind of
Too
more.
cute.
She's more similar to Julie Andrews
Yep.
than Emily Blunt. But and I know Kristen Bell really wanted the gig, but
She auditioned.
I I don't know if they did auditions because Emily Blunt was in
Into
Into the
the Woods.
Woods, so it makes sense that she would just be, asked. She was requested to perform this role, and in fact, she was pregnant at the time she was hired to do Mary Poppins, as was Julie Andrews in the original film.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
so they have that motherly glow as they're nannying these children or they're learning their lines. Oh, that's so fun. I didn't know that. She doesn't look. Did they film when she was pregnant? She doesn't look.
No,
Okay.
it was
Wonder
after.
Woman was pregnant apparently when they started filming.
Wow, yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, I can't remember if Julie Andrews was the first choice. I would almost think so. She may have been the first choice to play Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, but then they went with
Audrey.
Audrey Hepburn,
Yeah.
but because then she had done Sound of Music. I don't know. There's a whole story about that, like how the two of them kind of had a rivalry going over the course of these films. But I think Julie Andrews was the first choice. And with this movie, it was rumored at one point that Kate Blanchett would play the role of Mary Poppins. But that, is sort of spanning the entirety of the development of Mary Poppins sequel, which spans over 50 years.
Yeah.
So I'm sure a lot of names have kind of come up over that
Right.
time. I think in the 80s, even, they wanted to bring Julie Andrews back, and they started active development. And that was when Jeffrey Katzenberg was at the studio. But Peel Travers she wasn't a fan of the way they were going. They had to scrap their idea, and they decided against it. So wow, here we are. It's 2019. There's a new Mary Poppins movie, and most likely the first of at least several more. I can't imagine they want to simply hang it up after this one. But we'll see how long it takes before Mary Poppins returns again.
We should promise that no matter what we're doing, even if it's 54 years from now, we'll make a podcast about Mary Poppins Returns.
Oh, for sure.
Although, I don't know, maybe computers and podcasts and all that I mean, 54 years is a long time.
It'll be our own little
Promise.
podcast. It is kind of like I don't know, a word that doesn't seem to have the most longevity because it came from iPod, and people don't even use iPods anymore.
Mhm.
It's all like iPhones and smartphones. So who knows if that name will stick around? It almost seems like it has to, though, because podcasts have just become so ubiquitous.
Their own thing. Mhm.
Yeah, so Kristen Bell, she would have been a great Mary Poppins, but I just don't think she quite had the opportunity to
Jump in.
to nudge out, Emily Blunt, and of course Rob Marshall. He's actually from Wisconsin, if you knew that.
No.
Hmm He was Madison, Wisconsin. So, and then now off to do The Little Mermaid, which I
cannot wait for. That's going to be our best podcast ever.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and just stay tuned for hopefully more Jodie Pulaski in future Thodcast episodes.
Yep, and Dawson LQ will be back soon. So if you were missing him too much during this recording, don't worry. We're going to have him back next week or the next week.
So thank you all for listening. Happy 2019. I'm Philip Elke. You can find the Thodcast on all the various podcasting platforms: iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify. Visit us at thodcast.com. It's THAWEDCAST.com. All right. What should we say to sign off?
We hope your new year is practically perfect in every way.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
And then the audience claps. Woo!
Yay, clap, clap.